Today, today we're going to take a first look at a tabletop role-playing game called Impulse Drive. Impulse Drive is a game by Adrian Thoen. It is powered by the apocalypse, which means that, like Dungeon World, Night Witches, Sagas of the Icelanders, etc., 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 it's built on...
You have returned.
Thank you, Jerfy. It's built on a framework of moves, principles, agendas, and I'm going to dig in and we're going to find out just how much. Now, if you yourself want to check out Impulse Drive, it's on Kickstarter right now, as of the time of this broadcast. You can find it by using the Impulse command in chat, or if you're watching this on YouTube, just look in the description and I'll put a thing there. So these little streams that we've been doing, we did one recently for Free Spacer. We've got Impulse Drive. I have maybe a couple more lined up. I quite like them. They're a little nerve-wracking for me because I intentionally don't read through the whole game first because I want them to be sort of a true first look. But also, you know, they're built on these things that I'm ostensibly familiar with. And so what I'm really interested in doing today is looking at Impulse Drive and seeing how it does something different from what we've seen before. It's going to be really interesting looking at Impulse Drive as compared and contrast, because this is how we tend to look at games, right? It's like this game, but different, right? So it's built on the Apocalypse engine, like Free Spacer, but I suspect, based on what I know about this game, it's going to be pretty different from that game. There's a bunch of other sort of pulpy sci-fi games out there in the universe, and I want to find out how Impulse Drive is different. So this is not the final version of the game. This is a version of Impulse Drive that the author sent to me so we could take a look at it today. Keep in mind, layout, art, even the text may change between now and the game's final release. So, given that, let's have a look at Impulse Drive and try to figure out what exactly this game is about. Now, I want to start with the title because, man, I got to tell you, titling games is hard. Titling games is really hard, and titling sci-fi games is exceptionally difficult. I do not like doing it. Dungeon World is a joke. The name is a joke that John Harper made to make fun of us, and we just stuck with it because we couldn't think of anything we liked better, and now I love it. I mean, think about the sci-fi that we love and how boring its title is, right? Star Wars, Star Trek, Traveler. So boring. I do not like, none of those are evocative names, but we've come to love them by loving the thing that they are, right? Not their name. I quite like the title of Impulse Drive, actually. I think Impulse Drive is a cool, because it does, I think that a clever title does two things, right? That it says something on the surface, and then it also implies something underneath. So Impulse Drive it's a spaceship. It's like an engine for a spaceship, right? The Impulse Drive. If you watch Star Trek, you that's going to immediately twig in your head, oh, Impulse Drive, that's space stuff. But also impulse and drive are both character terms, right? Characters are impulsive and driven. So I kind of like this, and I'm curious to see how much the game kind of backs that up, right? I think it's a clever title, and I'm curious, Adrian, if you're in chat, which came first, the game or the title? Because it's pretty clever. So Impulse Drive claims to be a role-playing game about misfits and spaceships powered by the apocalypse. So the powered by the apocalypse thing is easy to prove, but a role-playing game about misfits and spaceships. Sure. Okay. All right. So it's a game about misfits and spaceships powered by the apocalypse. That's the subtitle of the game. Let's look at the pitch. So a little further detail, if we skip over the immediate fiction, down at the bottom here, we get a little bit more detail. Impulse Drive is a powered by the apocalypse hack about making a living on the fringe of civilized space, inspired by fiction such as Farscape, Firefly, Mass Effect, Star Wars, and many others. So Mass Effect, Firefly, Farscape, Star Wars, what do they all have in common? And is this game going to be able to cover that? Because if you ask me, there's a lot to just those four things. But yeah, I think that this fits into a specific subset of like scoundrels on a spaceship, right? This is Han. It's Han and Chewie, not Luke and Leia, right? It's not Jedi and the Rebellion necessarily. Same with Firefly, right? Firefly is the like scrappy losers on a spaceship. I'm not familiar enough with Farscape to answer that question, but it's interesting because Mass Effect feels like the outlier. Mass Effect feels like the outlier for me because Mass Effect is more like military sci-fi. Yeah. I mean, Mass Effect 2 like maybe fits better into that section, but I'm pretty curious about what the game is going to say. So yeah, definitely kind of in that Swan Song universe, probably more aliens than Swan Song, but that's just because I don't like aliens in my sci-fi that much. But yeah, so the game is telling us, without us looking into the mechanisms, it's telling us kind of what it's inspired by and what it intends to be. So I'm going to take a look. I'm going to save the acknowledgement for later because the acknowledgement will tell us the games that it was inspired by. I'd like to take a look at the mechanisms first and see what we can kind of learn about the game. Then we'll come back and we'll see where that stuff came from. So remind me later on. So it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, right? So what I expect from a Powered by the Apocalypse game is there are moves. There are probably a core set of basic moves that define what everyone can do. The playbooks will likely have their own moves that define more specifically what the types of characters can do in the world. So basic moves, peripheral moves attached to the character. There may be some special moves for doing additional stuff in the game, but those two things will be the main things. And then the GM will have principles and an agenda, and it will kind of clear up in the rules like what is expected of the GM as a player and how they operate. They'll have a clear rule set. So let's take a look. Let's see if I'm right about that. I can see over in the table of contents that we do have agenda and principles, but it looks like the players have those too, which is interesting. So in Apocalypse World, the game tells us as the game master, this is your job. Do these things in service of these things and always perform these actions in the game. This is how you GM the game. But for players, it doesn't lay that out. I think the first time that I saw player agendas was probably in like Tales from the Loop. And I actually think they're quite good because I would love it if the mechanisms of a game and the choices available to the players cleared that up and just said like, here you go. This is what you do because this is what your character can do. But so often, and I think because we've been programmed by certain popular role-playing games, that you just try to do anything, right? So I think clearly setting out for the players can be useful. Yeah, this is how to play this game. If you do things that are not on this list, you are not playing this game correctly. You are drifting, which is fine, but you're not going to get the experience I expect from you. So I think it's all right. I'm curious to see what the players' agenda and principles are. But let's look at the GMs. So the whole crew, I do like that the GM is called the Space Master. That's nice. That feels good for me. So the whole crew, everybody playing, there's rules that you have to follow. So your job is to play an interesting, active character. And I think interesting is a funny word to use here because it's like fun. It's very relative. So what I'm hoping, I guess the only way I can interpret this is be interested in your own character. Do not play a character that you are going to get bored of. Play a character that you think is fun, which I think you want to hope goes without saying, but it's clearly very important in this game. So play an interesting character, play an active character, do things. Don't just stand around. Explore dangerous and exciting worlds. So I think, again, like the agenda here, explore interesting, dangerous, and exciting worlds is something that there's mixed direction here, right? Because that first piece of the agenda is for a player. The second piece of the agenda is for the character. Because as a player, you can't explore dangerous and exciting worlds. We just get the one, which is it's the Earth. So play an interesting, active character, explore dangerous and exciting worlds as your character, and then play to find out what happens, which is a universal Powered by the Apocalypse agenda. I don't think I've ever seen that not fit in there. Your principles, which is how you fulfill your agenda, right? Your principles are take risks and embrace the consequences, right? So don't be scared to try new things. Your characters are meant for that, right? To just like get out there and do things. And I think this is something that's worth talking about in role-playing games, because there definitely tends to be this like fear of risking your character. And again, the mechanisms have to back that up, right? If you tell people take risks, but your character has 1 hit point and it takes 2 hours to make a new character, those two things will clash. So I think this is probably a safe principle for a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Learn your archetype's moves. Yes, like learn the rules. That's something you see in lots of other games too. Keep track of your hooks. Say when they apply. So hooks are, we're going to find out, but hooks appear to be the like your drive, your thing in the game that gives you purpose for your character, right? They'll tell you what you care about and how to interact with other members. It's the little character bit, like bonds or hex. Step up when it's your turn to shine. Step back when it's another player's turn to shine. Okay, yeah, so turning the spotlighting onto everybody, right? Making sure that everybody knows that that's a thing. Some of these, and again, some of these things are just baked into good role-playing, but I think that including them in the game highlights them. It says, do this specifically in this game. This is important in this game particularly. I would say that this is universal, like that you should do this in every game that you play, but it is cool to see a game state that. And I think more and more we're seeing games lay that stuff out, right? Saying this is how we play, this is how to manage the table, because as the hobby gets bigger, there's more and more clashing personal agendas. So if you can state it clearly in your rule book, then you're saying, okay, this is how it works in this game. We are taking a stand. Think cinematically. So this is again, we see this a lot in the Powered by the Apocalypse world. This like think fantastically, barf forth apocalyptica, etc. And then always say what the principles demand, right? So do the things that will embody these principles, right? Say them at the table. Do what honesty demands. So this is not a game of like keeping player secrets, right? Player secrets good. Not in this game. Player secrets in this, so the idea here with what honesty demands doesn't just mean like don't lie to your fellow players. It establishes this sort of director stance idea that we are all contributing to the narrative together. It pushes us a bit out of that that immersion or embodiment stance that we see in a lot of role-playing game tables. And then say what the rules demand. This seems like an obvious one to me, but it's good to see it written. Don't cheat. Like if the rules tell you to do something, pay attention to the rules. Right? Seems important to me. So there's further clarification of these. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but that's where we come from, right? This is the fundamental stuff that all of the people at the table should be doing when they play Impulse Drive, ostensibly. Most actions the characters take, these are our stats. This is our strength, dexterity. This is our cool and our weird. So characters in this game are volatile, calculating, slick, stalwart, or alien. So that's a thing. Volatile, calculating, slick, standard, alien. So this is what our characters are. They're not defined by any other core things. These are the ways they look at the world and how they solve problems. They solve problems with being volatile, so recklessness, impulsivity, violence, calculation, slickness. So this is like fast talking, smooth action. Stalwart is resilience, stubbornness, toughness, and then alien is essentially weird. Now, this is interesting because alien represents how weird you are and your relationship to the strange powers in the galaxy. Now, I wonder, when we say alien, alien is the one that really stands out to me because, like, in Apocalypse World, weird has a defining, like, it's weird as compared to your average human. But if I'm a Glorthaxian, but I have +3 weird, am I weird for a human? Am I weird for a Glorthaxian? How do we define weirdness and what is our baseline, right? So by definition, are all aliens because in sci-fi generally there's humanity and there's aliens. So I'm curious to see how that stuff intermingles. What is the baseline and how do we deviate from it? How do I know? Like if I have +3 weird in Apocalypse World, I know I'm super weird and I know I'm weird compared to most people, but in this game, I'm not sure what alien means yet. So we'll find out, I suppose. So this is all kind of terminology in the game. We'll come back to this if we find anything that we need to kind of like look at. But let's see. I want to look at the basic moves. I think the basic moves are what make up the game, right? So where do we find those? There's combat and action moves. Is there a set of just like straight up the basic moves like there is in Apocalypse World? I don't know. The first thing we get for moves are combat and action moves. It's interesting that that's the first set of mechanisms that we come across, right? That puts a really strong foot forward, saying this is the first thing you need to know. Action, right? Yeah. So I guess that's it, right? Like that, we should know that. We should look at this first. The game is putting it right in front of us. And so this is a game in which combat and action are significant. And we start with Firefight, right? You open yourself to danger and exchange violence with an enemy. That's a strong opening salvo, right? Telling us like this is the first thing that you should learn about. So this is a standard, looks like a standard move style, right? You roll 2d6. Well, I mean, is that made clear? Is it 2d6 plus? I mean, I assume that because powered by the apocalypse. But I wonder, I want the game to be clear about this for me. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm going to assume that it's 2d6. Obviously, I'm doing like a quick scan. Take a look. Oh, here we go. Rolling dice and processes. There it is. So when a move tells you to roll 2d6, add the appropriate modifier, and then immediately after that, look, the game has let me zoom in for you. The game has mechanisms for advantage and disadvantage. So I am not interested myself in the math of this, but I'm sure someone will be able to tell how much more likely you are to get 7+ on 3d6. I've seen a few other ways in Powered by the Apocalypse games to give advantage or disadvantage, right? To say, like, if you have advantage in a situation, you can't get a 6 or lower. You always get a 7. Or vice versa. You can't get a 10. Best you can do is a 7. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see that, right? So there's advantage and disadvantage in this game. Slight mechanical adjustment from Powered by the Apocalypse standard. Okay, let's get back to the moves. So the game puts right in front of us Firefight, Alpha Strike. So Firefight is the exchange fire back and forth. There's some clarification about how these moves can be applied. Alpha Strike is when your opponent can't retaliate, right? So the difference between exchanging violence with volatile or essentially just disabling or murdering at a distance or in an advantageous position with calculating. I think that's cool. It teaches you a little bit about what the differences between those kinds of violence are. And then we get into some more like fighty type stuff. Ineffective range. So it teaches you if you're outside of range, it could be effective with your weapon. You have disadvantage. There's a vehicle move, right? So vehicle combat is a thing. Engaging using the vehicle. So the ship, obviously, the game made the claim that the ship is important, right? That the ship is part of the game. It's about misfits and spaceships. So it's cool seeing that reinforced here mechanically.
You have returned.
Oh, thanks. Welcome back. So that's cool. That's nice. So we know right away combat is important. We know that ships are important. We get those, the first opening moves. And then recovery, how to get better from that stuff. So you get out of danger and take a moment to recover. So that's quite cool. It teaches us What's important by putting those rules out front? Combat and action is the most important. And then it's followed up by some additional stuff like act quick, right? So this is a move for negotiate. This is like the defy danger, right? It's sort of the active reactive move. A lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games have these. There is a keep your cool move. So when you get into peril, sort of the saving throw move. And then our help and hindrance type of move. So you support a crew member, roll plus stalwart, and then you can give them advantage. So those are our basic moves. So characters in this game, let's take a look, are they're able to firefight, alpha strike, pilot vehicles, engage enemies in vehicles, recover from all of that stuff, act quickly, keep your cool, and help each other. Yeah, notice there's no move in that base set for hindrance, right? The crew in this game fits together better than necessarily mechanically a Dungeon World group, or definitely better than an Apocalypse World group. They are mechanically better oriented towards each other. Now the individual playbooks might have some stuff to change that, but that's kind of how that seems to go. So we flow into hurt, death, and healing. So this is important because it tells us about the risk, right? Now we were admonished earlier on. Remember, to take risks and embrace the consequences. Now the game is going to teach us what will happen. What if we take those risks? What kinds of consequences are we going to embrace? So harm, stress, and calamity is the answer to that question. So harm represents physical stuff. You can take harm. Some apply conditions or new rules when you have them. You can take harm to get, I think, disadvantage in this case. You tick them off as you go, and then the final box of harm is you're toast. You're dead, right? So okay, that's something. But what's cool here is that there are alternative rules for death. So if you want to play, and I like this, I like when a game says, here's the baseline, and here's an entire chapter for deviating from that baseline. It sets a really nice precedent for people customizing the game within the parameters of their hoped for play. So harm looks like it's narrative in this case. So some examples are just a scratch, I'm rattled, I'm hurt bad, I'm knocked out, I can't go on. I like these. The first time I saw narrative harm like this was Apocalypse World Dark Ages, the like semi-finished game that Vincent was working on, where you would describe, and I copied it for the Court of Swords micro RPG, where you would describe each check or each circle was how you would describe how you were doing. Like, I've got 1 foot in the grave, I'll die today, I'll die in an hour, right? Like this description of what's happening. It's a bit like Fate as well, the idea of harmful aspects. So it looks like weapons and then some kind of physical action. It looks like those things inflict certain numbers of harm, and you tick those boxes. So getting shot with a gun, you're not necessarily going to be able to say just a scratch because it might be too powerful and it might override that. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. All right. And then vehicles have the same or similar, right? Your vehicle, ships and vehicles cannot be affected by harm from weapons, but instead suffer damage. Oh, okay. That's cool. That's way better, I think, than saying, people take one scale of harm and vehicles take another. You just use 2 different words for it. Objects get damaged, people are harmed. And that's a significant nomenclature, right? That's a very significant nomenclature, being able to say that, to be able to say people don't suffer damage. Only objects take damage, and you can't harm a vehicle or a ship. You can only damage it. I think choosing words is really important in a game, and I think that's a great distinction. It also lets you mechanize those things in 2 different ways. The sort of strangest way I've ever seen this applied is in Tenra Bansho Zero. Andy translates 2 different Japanese words into 2 different spellings of armor. Giant robots are armor with a U, and human size armor is armor without the U. Terminology is important, and I think it's interesting to see the ways that designers use them to define their game space. So yeah, that's neat. We damage objects and we harm people. Harm feels much more personal to me. I don't want to like linger on this, but I like this. This is cool. So how do we get better, right? So we've learned in the game that we take harm from bad things happening. How do we recover? How do we recover from these things? Oh, I see. We've got more. There's a third form. Okay. So there's harm, there's damage, and then there's stress. Right, and they lead to calamities. Okay, all right. So stress is marked in the same way when the Space Master tells you, or when a move tells you, or when you choose to convert him out of harm to stress, usually preventing yourself from dying. When you mark 5 stress, clear the track and mark a calamity. Oh, okay. So it has both Apocalypse World style, like harm as a thing, and then it has stress like Blades in the Dark. Interesting. Okay. And it looks like there's a bit of Night Witches in here too. Yeah, there is. This is why I wanted to save the taking a look at the acknowledgments until later, because we're going to pick up so many of these things. So we can be stressed out, and if we do, we take a calamity, and there's no way to heal that. Right. And this is how we mitigate harm with choice. Fascinating. Okay. So it pushes us to take risks for our character, and then it enables us to choose what that risk looks like. Does it look like harm that we recover from? Does it look like stress that builds up to a calamity? Marking calamities are permanent, and they can be beneficial. Right? Interesting. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, Blades has harm and stress as well, but this style of harm is much more like Apocalypse World style. I think it's interesting having multiple tracks to manage. And I like substitution. I think that's I like that choice. I think that's quite neat. So some examples of calamity when we take enough stress is fictional negatives, debilitations or injuries, mechanical benefits. And again, this is a lot like Night Witches. Night Witches gives you the choice to, when you are harmed, have some like benefit come from it. So a calamity might be a new ally, and you can describe how that happens. I think that's neat because, again, it turns risk into harm. You can convert harm into stress, and you can turn stress into something good, but only so many times. Like, you'll eventually have to pick the bad things from the list. Now, there are a lot of options, so I can only imagine you are taking harm and stress quite a lot, which, again, fits in with the pushing your characters to take risks. Yeah. And I got to say, like, from personal experience, this kind of system really resonates for me as a person who likes to play my character like a car on fire, driving down a hill made of spikes into a swamp full of acid. I love when the game will reward me for just going all out. So that's quite fun. And I don't think that we have to stick with the D&D paradigm or the Dungeon World paradigm of harm being bad. I think that fictionally harm can just mean change. I think that's interesting, and that's quite cool. So I like this. This is cool too. Death in the Void. If something happens to your character that would kill them immediately, then they die. I like that. It's a way to say, like, do you think this would kill you? Okay, yeah, then you're dead, right? Now, this is a dangerous statement to make as a designer, because you have to back it up with things to clarify what to do in this situation, right? Like, if this comes up, this is the kind of argument where who is responsible for saying this? Whose job is it to say, if something happens to you that would kill them immediately, then they die? Is it the GM's job? Does the player have any recourse? Is it the player's job? Do the other players have any recourse? Like, what do you do? And I think the way you handle this is by fictionally adjusting for the moves, and looking at the agenda and principles. And what I think is interesting here is, in a way, this is a move, right? You could phrase this as a move in an Powered by the Apocalypse game, right? If something would happen to your character that would kill them, that's the trigger, then here comes the move, they die, right? That is a valid move. In Apocalypse World, you can write a custom move that says, if Dremor touches you, you die. That's a valid move. That's a completely valid move. It's intense, and you want to soft move towards it, but that's a valid move in Apocalypse World, right? So same thing in here. This Death in the Void, this is actually a move, and I would treat it as such. But you have to, as with all moves, look at the fiction. You should look at the agenda and principles, etc., right? And then substitute harm, right? When you're directed to mark harm, you can exchange it at any time. This is also a move, right? Yeah. So there you go. And then healing, types of harm. Harm gets healed when you shrug it off. At the end of a scene, all your harm goes away, so harm is temporary. Okay, that's cool. So you can take stress to stay in a scene, but too much stress causes a calamity. Or you can get knocked out of a scene with harm and then heal it later when you get a chance. Or someone can heal it with first aid or surgery. Got it. Okay, cool. Complicated matrix of like how the characters get messed up. But again, it's important if the game is telling us to just dive in and play our characters, right? Take risks. That's quite cool. All right. So I wanted to, rather than go page by page, there's a couple of other things that I wanna like really kind of focus on. I want to show you this. I like these. I like diagrams that explain things. If we ever do a second edition of Dungeon World, I have a flow chart of how this game works that I want to polish up and put in there. So that's nice. I think that flow diagrams help. If reading blocks of text don't help you, this kind of thing is useful. Again, this looks like something from Blades. There's a Blades flow chart in there about how to play the game in terms of phases. So those kinds of things I find personally really useful. There's another flow chart or another flow description of combat. So it's a text version of what we saw. And then there's a couple of other supplemental moves that I want to take a look at. So common things that are common enough that there is a move to cover them, or rather things that the designer, that Adrian, wanted the players to have agency in. Now remember, when we talk about Powered by the Apocalypse as a system, there's two things, right? There's two spaces. There is the space in which the players have certainty over what is going to happen, and then there's the rest of the game. Some games rely really heavily on this, right? Sagas of the Icelanders lives and dies on this differentiation of spaces. Other games like Dungeon World, less so, right? Fictional positioning, the GM's agendas, principles, and rules navigate that mechanically. I don't want to say empty because it is mechanically oriented. It just doesn't have moves. Moves give the players an understanding of when you do X, you can expect Y or Z to occur. But if there's no move, it's when you do X, the GM will make a move in accordance. So by putting Intimidate as a specific move, this is saying to the person playing the game, I want you to have an understanding of what happens when you intimidate. You can understand and know that one of these following things will happen. There is a clear and understood determination of your results. If there isn't something like this, you can still try to intimidate, right? It's a role-playing game. You can do whatever the fiction allows, but without a move, your narrative is in the hands of the GM. Right? Your narrative is responded to by a GM move. So putting Intimidate as a clear thing is saying players in this game should expect to get a certain result when they intimidate someone. Share expertise appears to be the spout lore of the game. So you ask the GM a question, or you can ask the GM to make up the answer. On a 7 to 9, ask and the GM will give you an interesting. So that's interesting. I like this, and this calls this out specifically. If you get a 10 plus, the GM might say, no, you tell me the answer. What does your character know about this? But on a 7 to 9, authorial control is purely in the hands of the GM. Interesting. I like this. This is a cute move. Spout technobabble. So when you need to describe, when you describe some piece of advanced technology, process, or phenomenon, choose between 3 and 5 words or phrases and say it like you know what it means. Let's see. I want to see what this does. Oh no, that's it. You just describe it. Okay. All right. So I need to reverse the corrupted auxiliary organs. So this is cute. This is a nice way to like give the players a tool to make up bullshit. And that's nice. I don't necessarily know that I was expecting this to have a move, like a further move attached to it. This doesn't feel much like a move to me. This feels like a table or like a supplement. This is like the looks list. But there may be some mechanical interaction elsewhere. And then scope it out is our interrogative move. This is our, how does this work? What's going on in the narrative? Asking the GM what's specifically happening. And then we have manipulate, which is promises, guile, or charm. It's the flip side of our move to intimidate, right? It's the non-threatening variation. And there's 2 different versions. There's a PC version and an NPC version, which I think is quite good. I think it's important because I think it's cool to have players having more control over NPCs than they do over each other. The carrot and the stick method is tried and true, works great. Hey, fellow player, do what I want, and you can have experience. Or do what I want, or you need to keep your cool. It's gonna fuck with you if you don't do this thing. What else we got? What else mechanically? There's a fair number of moves, and we've taken a look at exploration. We've taken a look at combat. The remaining moves are, let's see. Oh, that's cute. That they made advancement is a form of move. When you roll a 6, take experience. So like in Dungeon World, and then when you have 5 experience, gain a new approach, or rather, upgrade an approach, gain an archetype move, or open a gear slot. Oh yeah, we missed Into the Abyss. Right. So Into the Abyss is open your mind to the maelstrom. This is the Assaulted by the Abyss. So the Abyss is this game's Maelstrom. Yeah, Assaulted by the Abyss. So this is a reactive move, I assume, when the GM will tell you this happens. And then the Abyss stares back. So the GM asks you questions. Yeah, this both covers the kind of interrogative magic knowledge thing that can happen in games like this. It also implies that there is some kind of force, some kind of bizarre alien force that exists that will mess with the characters. So yeah, and then this is additional information about how your characters get hooked into a situation. So these things are reliant on the character archetypes, and I want to look at what the characters are and what their abilities are. So we're gonna skip over plot moves. But I want to talk about cliffhanger in a second, but I want to make sure we understand how to make a character in this game, because I think that's important. That's really important. So building your character, which is to say a desperate individual on the fringes of galactic civilization. So the characters in this game are, and this is huge, right? Because this covers everything that you can be if you are in this game. You can be a hound, which is a tracker, hunter, bloodhound. This is our bounty hunter, right? You can be an infiltrator, which is like a hacker, a stealth operative, someone to get into places where they are not meant to be. The intellect, which is a scientist, doctor, engineer, anthropologist, the nerd. A mystic. So this is the sort of Jedi bit, right? Myths and folktales of wandering seers and knights. The outsider, right? So maybe you're an AI, a sentient spaceship, a drone from a hive mind species. That's a pretty big deal, including something like that. Like the Hound, the Infiltrator, the Intellect, the Mystic, all of those seem like they're pretty fundamentally similar. And then you have the outsider. a sentient spaceship. Okay, all right. The Scoundrel. So this is our Han Solo, right? Slick, smart, and cocky. You have a reputation for getting in where you don't belong. The Tempest, right? A loose cannon, the Wild One. And then the Warhorse, a soldier, a warrior, honed by battle. So I think that covers pretty much the stuff that we would expect it to be covering. Obviously, the Outsider is the most interesting one here because it's the broadest deviation from what we've come to expect. Like, I could probably tell you most of the moves that would be attached to a Scoundrel or a Warhorse or an Infiltrator based on my understanding of like the design space this game is coming from. But the Outsider is the one that I would say, hang on a second, what's that about? Right. So this one is the one I'm most interested in. But I want to see the general overlook, and I want to understand how do we get at what an alien is? What is the difference between aliens and humans in this game? So the very first thing is choose a pre-generated name, choose a pronoun, and choose 4 words that describe your character in a general way. And I really like that it has a link to understanding gender pronouns, and it has a table for pronouns with some additional links or some additional tests for how to use them, right? That's very cool because obviously, like, there's a lot of different ways to present a character's gender, and it's nice to have some guidance around that for tables that may not have like a clear understanding of what that looks like. So here's some ways to practice and some alternate gender options for how to describe your character's gender. And like a full paragraph about pronouns. That's super cool. I think it's really important in a sci-fi game because if you can't envision a future in which there are a vast array of ways to express yourself as a character and express your gender, then you're probably not doing sci-fi correctly. So that's very cool. I like that. It's nice. It's nice that that's called out particularly. You're going to select your approaches. We talked about these from before. These are the approaches. And then we're going to look at our archetype moves. Now, we've seen hooks mentioned a few times in the game. So now we're going to get an idea of specifically what they're about. So hooks are things that are true about your character that make them unique and interesting. They cause complications in their life. It could be a goal, an instinct, a trait, or a connection to PCs or NPCs. When your hooks complicate your life and you have disadvantage, you're more likely to roll 6 or less. Since players mark experience when they roll 6 or less, playing to your hooks increases your opportunity to mark XP. Okay. Hooks are designed to encourage and reward character to play, to get players to show and explore their quirks, weaknesses, and flaws of their characters. Okay, so they're just things that complicate your life, and you'll get experience more often because you will fail more often when you do these things. I think that makes sense, right? Failure leads to experience. Hooks, it's funny because your goals, instincts, traits, and connection indirectly by way of the resource loop lead to you failing more often. So inherently, pursuing your goals complicates your life, which makes it harder to succeed. So I'm imagining that the characters in this game, I would love to see this loop in action because just reading it, characters in this game don't seem like they're likely to achieve their goals. Because if your goal complicates your life, then you get better by getting experience points. So you're more likely to overcome that disadvantage when you... Interesting. This is a weird loop, and I'm super curious to see how it runs in play. Like on the long term. Yeah, like you fail into experience, you advance your character, you get better, which means you're more likely to succeed at the things that are complicated, in which case you get disadvantage. Okay, interesting. All right, so a goal could be like get my family to safety, discover the secrets of the artifact, etc. Well, winning the game is being rewarded by experience, so you have to pursue your goals. Yeah. Again, hence the scrappiness, right? The idea of the character that fails but continues to fight and gets better through their failure. Yeah. Okay. So goals are one form. I think it seems to me instincts and goals are, I don't know, maybe they're mechanically different. Let's see. Achieving their goal is something the character wants, but your reward is their pursuit of it. There it is. That's the thing for goals, right? The character wants to achieve your goal, but you don't care about that. You just want to pursue the goal. That's pretty cool. And it's nice that it's stated clearly right here. Like that thing, Adam, that you were just thinking before you got to this sentence, that's true. Yes. Your reward as a player is the pursuit of the goal, but your character wants to achieve it. Even though the character may never get their goal, the point of a goal is not to achieve it. Wow. That is... I think that there are some people who are going to have a real hard time getting their head around this, but for the people that this makes sense for, that's some good shit right there. Rewarding the pursuit, but not rewarding... Like, achieving your goal doesn't get you anything. Pursuing it and struggling, that's what matters. Fascinating. Instincts are automatic behaviors or responses, a la the burning wheel, always shoot first, never transgress a law, etc., etc. Sometimes instincts might help. It's fine, but you don't get XP for it. It's just you can lean on it. Right, straight up burning wheel instincts. You get disadvantage on anything that your instinct interferes with. Yeah, okay. That's clear to me. I understand how that works. A trait, I'm exceptionally hairy. I excrete a slimy residue. Oh yeah, again, much like burning wheel traits, things that are true about your character that might complicate your life. My prosthetic hand is clumsy, right? So you describe yourself, I'm trying to intimidate this person. I reach out and my prosthetic hand keeps like slapping me in the face while I'm trying to talk. I have disadvantage on this intimidate roll because it's kind of comedic and not very intimidating. Yeah, cool. Okay, I see that loop. This is my favorite part of the game so far. Hooks and how they work. I like this. This is the best bit for sure. And then connections. Your connection to various people will complicate your life, right? I owe a lot of money to the crime boss. I love blank and will do anything for them. I've got to protect blank from themselves. Interesting. Okay. All right, cool. So it's neat taking all of these little bits and pieces from various role-playing games and saying these in our game, in Impulse Drive, these are all hooks. You can express how you want to get experience by either being like socially oriented, by your character's traits, by... Okay, that's quite cool. Yeah, that's really neat. This is the thing for me so far about this game. Totally. Huh. Okay, cool. Well, we don't have time to go into like every single archetype, but I will take a look at a few. Oh, look at that good boy. So these, I think, they're going to clear up pretty much the questions, right, that you expect from character creation, right? So they give you some name options, some description options, how to work out your approaches, the kinds of stuff that you would kind of expect. They give you your signature move. They give you a background. Now, is that true of everybody? Do we all get signature moves and backgrounds? Signature move, background. Signature move, background. Okay, good, cool. Okay. And then they give us our hound moves, or yeah, right. So we spend these as we go. Cool. I bet you there's some really good stuff in here, but I definitely do not have, I don't have like time to dig in. But we can look at how hooks go. Fill in at least 3 of your starting hooks and choose your favorite 3 to be your current hooks. Oh, okay. Interesting. So I would almost certainly, as a player of this who's familiar with the game, probably just write 3 hooks, or like write a bunch of hooks and then pick 3, and not necessarily like look at these directly myself. Like I again, it's like bonds, right? If you're familiar with Dungeon World, you can just make up your own bonds, but we provide the list so you don't have to. Same with alignments or race or starting moves or class. Really, like you can build for yourself anything you want in Dungeon World. And if you're an advanced player and you've played the game a bunch of times, you maybe just start off making up your own stuff. One thing I will call out here that I think is interesting, so when a hook applies to the current situation, you, the Space Master, or another player brings it up, you can either decline the offer or apply it. So I think that's interesting because it's not this isn't, unlike a lot of the other stuff in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, it's not fiction first, right? Normally, when a hook applies to the current situation, you would have to do the thing because the fiction demands it. But in this case, the player is allowed to choose whether or not to mechanically let that influence the moment. I'm not sure this is the design choice I would have made, but I also have not played the game. I haven't seen how this works. But it's essentially take disadvantage and get the experience potentially, or just say no. But what does that mean about what is the fictional ramifications of saying no, I decline the offer? Right? Like if I say I get the shakes if I go too long without buying new clothes, and we're in a clothing store and the GM or the SM says, hey, I think that if you want to try to get through this situation, you got to try to you got to make a move to hold it together because your character is going to get the shakes. And you say, no, I'm rejecting my hook. What does that mean? Yeah. I feel like there should be some further check-in about this. Because, I think, Leafington in chat pointed out what I agree with. I think that means the hook is not true anymore. This is like when Dungeon World rewards you experience for playing your alignment and you say no to switch your alignment. I want to know what happens then. If you decline the hook, what else? Yeah. Is there something else that follows from this? If there isn't, I'd love to see it. Right? When a hook applies to the situation and someone brings it to the attention of the group, if you reject the hook, what does that mean? Interesting. Cool. Okay. Well, let's take a look. And I'm starting to get an idea. I'm starting to get an idea of how aliens work. I think alien is a stat. I think everyone is an alien. This is not a humanocentric game. I think part of your description and also like the art, some of the first art we have, right? The hound is a little koala man, and the infiltrator is like an invisible chameleon person, and the intellect is a cyborg halfling, right? This is the first human looking character we've seen. So I think everybody is an alien in this. And alien means how weird you are and how close to that abyss, that strange abyss you are. And it's like Apocalypse World. In Apocalypse World, everybody is human-ish, but some people are weird. So alien is just how alien you are compared to everyone at large, I think. And the other player characters, especially. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So the outsider is particularly alien. Life in the galaxy comes in all shapes, sizes, societies, and cultures, but most aliens are just people with reasonably similar drives and motivations. But you're different, fundamentally different from the others in a way that makes you entirely alien to them. Right. So your signature move, yeah, awesome. Awesome. Okay. So what this means is everybody else is people with bumpy foreheads, but if you want to be a real full-on alien, choose the outsider. Again, like Dungeon World, everybody is an elf, a dwarf, a halfling, a salamander, a human, whatever, but the barbarian is an outsider. The barbarian is from somewhere else. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I don't want to go too deeply into the dive, but I think that's quite cool. I think that's interesting that the outsider, if you want to be like a for real alien, this is the one. And that's nice because for me, I like aliens that are truly alien, and I think this is an okay way to put out there that you are the exception. And if a player wants to be the big weird, they can. That's quite cool. Yeah, I dig it. Cool. All right. Let's take a quick look at gear, because I think gear is interesting. So gear is stuff that is pulled from gear is important to most sci-fi, right? It's the weapons, it's modifications for the ship, it's computers, it's armor, right? So that lays out the different kinds of gear and tells us kind of what's important about the gear. So it's cool that here's how we lay it out, right? So once you buy a gear item, it doesn't reflect necessarily like this one pistol. It represents permanent access to pistols of this kind. So your loadout can then be refreshed. That's quite a neat way of looking at. Gear. Like it's a blueprint someone could make. You could 3D print it, right? So that way there can be an in the moment problem of you lose your laser sword, right? You're in a laser duel with the Baron Dark Lordia, and he knocks your laser sword off a cliff. You're not killing the player's ability to be a laser knight. You're just taking away their sword for now, because gear is permanent. It's an unlocked piece of the gear, and they can refresh it. Yeah. I like that, because too often players will build their identity around like their item, their magic gun. And then if they lose it, you can feel like a real jerk as the GM for taking it away from them. Or you can not feel like a jerk, but they can think you're a jerk. So I like the idea of taking it. It takes it out of the moment and allows you to get it back. Again, reinforcing that idea of playing your character aggressively and not worrying about whether or not you are going to stop having fun because of a risk you took. Clever. Good reinforcing of that original theme. Cool. So there's a bunch of different ways to determine what the weapons can do. The basically like different tags for gear, right? Skirmish, discharge, messy, full auto, right? The kinds of things that if you're familiar with the Apocalypse engine, these kinds of things you've seen before. I like tagging on gear. I think it gives a good, quick narrative understanding of those things. And then it also allows for modification. So you can add mods to your character, right? It gives you the ability to, again, either create specific moves or give yourself tags. So this is like how in Dungeon World, the Barbarian always has the messy tag because of who the Barbarian is. You could get a mod that gives you specific like permanent tags for your characters, or custom moves, right? When you use your super speed to avoid danger, discharge this modification and roll act quick at advantage. Yeah, pretty solid, good understanding of the base mechanisms of Powered by the Apocalypse, and very, very useful. Now, I want to take a look at the ship. So let's take a quick look at the ship. So the ship determines, while the player playbooks determine what the characters are and can do, the ship playbook determines what they do together. This is the crew book. This is the demon in Womb of Night. This is the overarching thing that ties you together, right? So your ship is a smuggler, a predator, a vanguard, or a marauder. So that's pretty clear, right? That'll build you right in. And when you choose the ship playbook, it will determine the various types of stuff that your ship can do, and as a result, what your characters can do. I like that it gives you starting debt. So we get a little bit into that debt runner stuff, your creditor's disposition, right? We talked about this when we did the Free Spacer walkthrough, right? We talked about how the ship often represents both the freedom of the open space road, but also being tied to someone, because most scrappy idiots cannot afford their own spaceship. So you put them in this Han Solo situation, right? Where you owe somebody something. So that's cool. And then the ship has its own moves, just like a character. Again, kind of like aspects on an object in Fate, right? So it gives you that stuff. So we have options for ships. The ship obviously itself has moves, and the game teaches us how to use them. And we saw the basic moves for running the ship. So the ship isn't like a character in and of itself, but it is a vector by way that we can make other moves and we can affect the universe around us. Cool. Yeah. Not ship as character, but ship as framework for character activity and object. Yeah. That's really cool. So I want to take a quick look. So this is interesting. So I was looking for the GM moves. I was looking for the GM moves, but there aren't any in this game. And this is an interesting choice, like sort of mechanically, right? Ludo mechanically. I like the idea of calling the GM move something different, right? It's a call, like a ref's call. Whenever everyone looks to you to see what happens, choose one of these. Each call is something that occurs in the fiction of the game. They're not code words. You just do the thing. So whenever this is the exhaustive list of everything that you should be doing when you are GMing this game. Let's take a look. And I think these look familiar. Use an NPC, location, or ship call. Sure, makes sense. NPCs, locations, and ships will have their own special calls you'll use. Divide them. Deliver bad news. Give them a tough choice to make. Put something vital in danger. Deal harm. Show danger approaching. Offer an opportunity with or without cost. Hint at danger elsewhere. Use up their resources. Destabilize the environment. Give them advantage or disadvantage. Turn their move back on them. Tell them of possible consequences and ask. All fairly clear. I think that put something vital in danger, show danger approaching, and hint at danger elsewhere are pretty close, but nuanced enough that they all fit. And then there's some clarity around what to do, like when to make that call, and then the difference between soft calls and hard calls. And I think that's something that's important that we've learned as a powered by the apocalypse community, as people who play these games a lot now, understanding what the difference between a hard move and a soft move, or in this case, a hard call and a soft call are. And I think those are really important. The idea here is that you kind of set up your hard calls, but sometimes you're allowed to bring them out of nowhere. And I think that's tricky, right? That's tricky for some groups. So I think the more we build that in, the better. And the better we understand it, and the more those evolve, the better that people who GM these types of games will be. Because I'm the kind of GM where I like when a game clearly lays out, if you get a 6 or less, the GM can do literally anything they want to you, as long as it flows from the fiction and follows their agenda and principles, right? Like, if you are fighting in battle with an ogre and you throw a move, I can say the ogre hits you with his club and you fall off the cliff. Like, that is a thing I am empowered to do in Dungeon World. And I like when the game is clear about that stuff, what you are and are not allowed to do. Because that's what rules are, right? That's the point of rules in a game. Yeah, and Dissonance points out, and I like this too, a hard call is irrevocable, right? A soft call, you can go back. A soft call, you can be like, this thing starts to happen. What are you going to do? Whereas a hard call, you're like, this thing has happened. It is too late. I have made that call. So the rest of the Space Master chapter kind of lays out how to structure the game, right? Creating a contract for the players, what types of contract there are, lots of random rolling, which I think is great, right? So it's an assault contract. Let's roll a d20, a d6, and a d10. We'll get our target, our intent, and our complication. Really good. Nice to have these tools. These kinds of tables are really valuable in a role-playing game. And as we've talked about when we talked about Stars Without Number, these kinds of tables not only give you tools, but they define the universe, right? If it's on the table, that means it might happen. And so reading these tables, not just rolling on them, but reading them gives us an understanding of the universe that we're trying to build. I think that's really valuable. So good work on including those. That's really cool. We've got options for locations, right? How to build those. NPCs. Like these kinds of tools are really useful in a game. They really help us understand the parameters of the kinds of characters, places, and stuff that is going to be going on. Also, check this out. This reinforces what we learned earlier. Alien NPCs are unique individuals, interdimensional interlopers, right? Super intelligent, amorphous. Like these are big deal singular entities. Alien in this means alien from the universe at large. Yeah. And then always a valuable chapter to me as both a game designer and an experienced GM, a chapter for hacking, drifting, or messing with the game. Really cool. Do not give me a game and then just tell me, change the game however you want. Give me tools. Give me tools to justify my allowance. Show me how I can change this game. Very cool. This chapter is, I think, a necessity at this point. If you're building a game where you intend people to drift or manage the rules in their own way, tell them how to do it. That's very cool. So let's go back and take a look. Let's see how we did on the acknowledgments. Let's take a look at acknowledgments. So let's see. Acknowledgement and license. Here we go. If I scroll on down to the bottom, Impulse Drive is based on rules and text from Dungeon World. That does not surprise me. Thank you. Dungeon World is powered by The Apocalypse by Vincent Baker. Fellowship by Jacob Randolph. I am not familiar with that game. Night Witches. Very clear influence there, right? We saw that. I love Night Witch's harm system. And just as an aside, I saw floating around Night Witch's hack that Jason is working on as like a reward for some other thing that includes 2 new actual witches as playbooks, which is pretty cool. So if you're into Night Witches, take a look for that. Monster Hearts. We saw a little bit of that. Burning Wheel. Yep. The Sprawl. Totally makes sense. And then everything in here is Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 3.0. So if you like some of this stuff, like for example, hooks, you could port it into other work that you were doing. That's so cool. And yeah, these are all mechanically, like, I don't know, I haven't played or read Fellowship, but everything else in here is really clear and a nice adaptation of that stuff. It's a really cool, really cool way to drift Dungeon World. I'm super impressed by most impressed by hooks. I think that's a very fascinating flow. And I would love to see it in play. I actually think, and I didn't catch the link. I'll try to tweet it later. But there's an actual play of this online if you wanna watch it. Maybe in chat, Matt Adrick has the link to it. But I'll definitely send it out later. There's an actual play going on of this on the internet. So if you want to see it in action, you can, which is always nice. So that's Impulse Drive. It's on Kickstarter right now. Impulse Drive is let me see how many more days as of the time of this video. Let's see. Impulse Drive is, I think, another 2 weeks. Let's see. Yeah, 14 days, exactly 2 weeks, 2 more weeks. Impulse Drive. It looks like it's funded, so that's really cool. So you can jump in. There's no worry it's not going to get done. Congratulations, Adrian. So go check it out. Check it out on Kickstarter if you think that it was something that was interesting to you. If you want to do space in a Dungeon World style, Impulse Drive seems to be a good choice. I'm fascinated by that hooks mechanism. Huh. Cool. Well, so thank you, Adrian, for reaching out. Thanks to you for watching, everybody, coming and checking out the show. If you like this kind of content, we will try to do more of them. These little kind of first looks at RPGs. I have a few more that I've been talking to developers about, putting on the stream, and I always like being able to make people aware of new games. So if you like it, check it out on Kickstarter. Thanks for coming, everybody. This has been Impulse Drive. I've been Adam Coble, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.